Welcome to CrimePod Castle Unsolved Mysteries Series, Episode 6. You ready to dive into some seriously heavy stuff today?
Always.
Okay, good. We're talking about the Nithari Killings in India.
Back in 2006?
Back in 2006, yeah. Just a warning, this one is pretty disturbing. We're talking missing kids, frantic families, a whole community living in fear. It's the kind of case that really sticks with you.
Yeah, what makes the Nithari killings so haunting is that it wasn't just about the brutality of the crimes themselves, but it also kind of exposed ripped the lid off of some really deep societal problems in India at the time. It's one of those stories that forces you to confront uncomfortable truths about poverty, about neglect, about how vulnerable some communities are, especially marginalized ones.
So let's unpack this case, dive into it. How did this whole nightmare unfold? Take us back to the beginning.
Okay, so picture this. It's December 29th, 2006 in Nithari.
Okay.
It's a village right outside of Delhi, part of that sprawling urban area they call the National Capital Region. A woman is desperately searching for her missing daughter, and she stumbles upon something truly horrifying.
Oh, God.
In a drain behind a seemingly ordinary house.
What?
Not just one body, but multiple skeletal remains.
Oh, my God. That image alone just sends chills down your spine. And this house, you said it belonged to an ordinary businessman.
Yeah, a guy named Moninder Singh Pandher.
Okay.
The discovery was so shocking. It was so out of place in what seemed like a normal neighborhood. It's almost impossible to grasp the fear and disbelief that gripped the community.
And the victims, who were they?
All children.
Oh, wow.
And all from poor families.
Ugh.
Think about that for a second.
Yeah.
Their disappearances, they hadn't gotten much attention from authorities. Some weren't even reported. Others, well, it's like they were dismissed. That detail right there, that tells you everything you need to know about the bigger picture of this case.
Yeah, that's a gut punch. It makes you wonder how many other children might have gone missing without anyone even noticing because of their socioeconomic background.
Exactly. The Nithari killings became this tragic symbol of how deep the divide is between the privileged and the vulnerable in India, and how that divide can literally mean the difference between life and death.
So the investigation starts, and it quickly focuses on two main figures, Pandher, the homeowner, and his domestic help, a guy named Surinder Koli. What happens next?
Well, as the police start digging, literally digging, it just gets worse. More remains are found. 16 victims are eventually identified. Though there's a chilling possibility that the actual number could be much higher.
Wow. It's hard to even fathom 16 families going through that kind of loss.
Yeah.
And then there's Koli's confession. He admits to not only luring these children to the house, but also to committing horrific acts and ultimately murdering them.
Yeah, the details of his confession, they were just beyond disturbing. Cannibalism, necrophilia.
My God.
It's not just about the shock value, it's that these acts point to a complete lack of empathy, a total disregard for human life, and it sent a wave of horror through the entire country.
I can imagine. It's hard to even begin to process that level of depravity. But I think what makes this case even more disturbing is the larger context. This wasn't just about one or two individuals, right? It revealed something really broken in society itself.
Absolutely. Think about it. How could so many children disappear seemingly without a trace? How were their families' pleas for help ignored for so long? The Nithari killings, they weren't just a crime, they were a symptom of a much larger problem.
So what exactly did this case expose about Indian society at the time?
Well, one of the most glaring issues was police negligence, especially when it came to these vulnerable communities.
Yeah.
The fact that so many children could vanish and their disappearances were treated with such indifference, it revealed a deeply flawed system.
Just like those children were invisible. Their lives somehow considered less valuable because of their poverty.
And that points to the broader problem of marginalization. Because these children were from poor families living in slums, their disappearances didn't raise the same alarm bells as they might have if they'd come from more affluent backgrounds. It's heartbreaking, really. These kids were failed by the very people who were supposed to protect them.
It's a stark reminder that even in a bustling metropolis like Delhi, poverty can make you invisible, even in death. It really makes you question the systems in place, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And the Nithari killings, they didn't just expose the problem, they ignited this massive wave of outrage and activism all across India.
Really?
Yeah, people took to the streets demanding justice, not just for these victims, but for everyone who had been silenced or overlooked by the system.
So the case sparked a movement for change.
Absolutely. It forced India to have some very uncomfortable conversations about child safety, police accountability, and social justice. It was a turning point.
Given the horrific nature of these crimes and the sheer public outcry, what happened when the case went to trial?
Well, both Pandher and Koli were given the death penalty in 2009.
Wow.
But that's not where the story ends. The case took some twists and turns that made everything even more complicated.
Oh, really? What do you mean? Well, Pander ended up being acquitted on some of the charges
What?
because there wasn't enough evidence to directly link him to all the murders.
Huh.
This sparked a huge debate about his actual role in everything that happened. Was he directly involved, or was he, as his lawyers claimed, completely unaware of the atrocities happening right under his nose?
It's almost impossible to believe that someone could be oblivious to something that horrific happening in their own home.
Right. It raises all these questions about willful ignorance, about how far people will go to protect themselves, even if it means ignoring the suffering of others.
It makes you wonder about the psychology of it all. What kind of person could turn a blind eye to something so monstrous?
And on the other side of the coin, you have Kultai.
Okay.
His death sentence was upheld. But even that led to these really complex conversations about individual culpability in a case like this. Some argued that, yes, he was the one who carried out these acts, but he was also a product of the very society that failed to protect his victims.
So you have these two figures, Pandher and Koli, both condemned for their roles in this horrific tragedy. But their stories, their levels of culpability, are so different. It's a case painted in shades of gray.
And that's why, even today, all these years later, the Nithari killings still have this hold on us. There are so many unanswered questions, so many what-ifs.
Like what? What are some of the questions that linger even today?
Well, for starters, was Koli truly the only one responsible?
Hmm?
Did Pandher play a larger role than what could be proven in court? Were there other individuals involved, maybe even a wider network at play that we don't know about?
It's terrifying to think that there might be more to this story than we know.
Then there are questions about the investigation itself. Could more have been done to prevent these killings? Were there missed opportunities, warning signs that were ignored by authorities?
I imagine those are questions that haunt the families of the victims every single day.
Absolutely. And perhaps the most haunting question of all is this. How can we, as a society, ensure that a tragedy like this never happens again? What can we do to protect vulnerable children, to create a world where their lives are valued, where their disappearances don't go unnoticed, where they're not just statistics?
Yeah, it feels like a weight,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Knowing about these cases, about the suffering those families endured, it's a reminder that we have to do better to be better.
It's heavy, that's for sure. The Nithari killings really show us that the fight for justice, for equality, for protecting the most vulnerable among us, it's not something that ever ends.
Right.
We have to be vigilant. We can't look away from these hard truths, and we can't let ourselves become complacent.
So for our listener who's been with us on this deep dive, what's the takeaway? What do we do with all of this?
I think the Nithari killings challenge us to go beyond the headlines, beyond the horror, and really see the human cost. These weren't just victims. They were children with their own stories, their own families who loved them.
It's easy to get caught up in the facts of a case like this, the numbers, legal proceedings, but we can't forget that each of those 16 confirmed victims, and potentially more, represents a life cut short, a family shattered.
And it pushes us to think about justice in a broader way. It's not just about punishing the guilty. It's about building a society where these kinds of crimes are less likely to happen in the first place. A society where poverty doesn't equal invisibility, where children are safe, where law enforcement is accountable, and where the voices of marginalized communities are truly heard.
It's a tall order, but it's a fight worth having. As horrible as they were, the Nithari killings can be a catalyst for change. They remind us that we have to keep pushing for a more just and equitable world.
Well said. This case was a tragedy of immense proportions, but it also ignited a spark of awareness, a call to action that still resonates today. And it's up to all of us to keep that flame alive, to honor the memory of those victims by working towards a world where such horrors are unthinkable.
That's a powerful message to end on. Thanks for being with us on this difficult but crucial journey. We hope this deep dive into the Nithari killings left you not only with a sense of sadness, but also with a renewed sense of purpose, a commitment to fight for justice and equality in all its forms.
And if this conversation has resonated with you, we encourage you to keep the dialogue going. Share your thoughts, share your feelings, share your ideas for action. This is a conversation that needs to continue because it can lead to real, meaningful change.
Don't forget to like, share, comment, and follow CrimePod Castle Unsolved Mystery Series for more explorations into the darkest corners of true crime. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.